Number one, most cost effective. Do you know what the number two is?
Clean water.
I wonder if that's public health. I guess I'm thinking more on the lines of like doctors and things like that.
Okay.
And it's a general surgeon. It's for a population to have access to a general surgeon. So a general surgeon can do so much, can do cesarean sections, hernias, appendixes, small bowel obstructions, all the other things that kill people. So if you have one general surgeon for a population, that's the second most cost-effective intervention you can do. So I'm a huge fan of vaccines. Huge.
So talking to general surgery though, and bringing us into artificial intelligence, the idea that we could potentially have, for instance, remote control of robots in obscure regions where it's difficult to have a doctor on staff, but maybe perhaps you could put something in there that could operate. But that even seems obscure. I'm thinking here of two different directions on this: telecommunication advancements because of latency issues, or artificial intelligence to have an automated machine. But I don't know, because I've talked to a roboticist and he says the kinematics behind trying to get a robot arm to be programmed and operate properly is extraordinarily difficult in current technology.
What you're talking about to do for a telemanipulation for a surgeon to do the surgery with a console and
Yes.
doing it. Well, that already exists. I mean, they've already done that. They did that, talking about 9/11, they did that, I think on September 7th, 2001, they did the Lindbergh operation where there were surgeons in New York operating on a console and the patient was in France, or vice versa, to be honest. I can't remember which.
Yeah.
But they did that 23 years ago. So imagine the technology now. Now
Yeah.
there's a company called Sovato. Dr. Dennis Fowler is their chief medical officer, and they're working on that very thing. But there's many instances where that's already been accomplished. You know, so they do it in China. They've done it in India in the animal model. I don't know if they've done it in humans, but the latency issue is not really a problem anymore.
Really? I did not know that. I've had some
Yeah.
conversations and thought it was still an issue.
Yeah. No, it's amazing how also people still don't understand what a robot is, right? Because if robot comes from the Czech word for slave or servant, if you want to be more polite, but it's essentially a slave. And the reality is the current complete surgical system, you have a surgeon working at a console, and then you have robotic arms that the surgeon is telemanipulating, or via remote controller being moved. So the surgeon, that's a very low level of autonomy. That's a human being the slave, is what I'm trying to get at. That is really not robotic surgery. People call it robotic surgery, but it's just laparoscopic surgery. It's just minimally invasive surgery with a fancy end effector. A robot, as I think the simplest term is a device that can replace the actions of a human. Sometimes people think it has to look like a human. I think that's ridiculous. I use the definition of it's just something that has to replace the actions of a human. And so I actually got into a discussion with someone recently because I was talking about an AICD, an automated intracardiac defibrillator device, implantable defibrillator device. Essentially, it's like a pacemaker, but it has electrodes in the heart that detect an arrhythmia. And then if there's a malignant arrhythmia, it'll shock the patient autonomously out of it. So, back before we had AICDs, a cardiologist or whoever would put on the EKG, detect the arrhythmia. And if the person goes into cardiac arrest, it would shock them, right? So that's what a human does. So the AICD, it's not like Lost in Space, danger, Will Robinson, danger. You don't even remember, you don't even know this reference I'm making. That's not a robot, bravo. A robot is something that replicates the actions of a human. So an AICD, in my opinion, if you think about it, is a robot, and that is completely autonomous. It has no input of a human. It diagnoses a lethal problem, and it saves a human being's life, and that has been around for decades. So people are really having a hard time understanding what autonomy is, what an autonomous robot is. And the funny thing is that people are, but regulations, or what about this, or what do we have to think about that? And it's like, okay, I agree with you. We have to think about regulations and all these things, but we also have to acknowledge that this thing already exists and has existed for decades. And and it's coming in more and more forms. You know, whether old time doctors like it or not.
No, absolutely. And that's more what I was getting at with the autonomy aspects and the kinematics with robots is the artificial intelligence. According to the roboticist, he says that the kinematic programming is still something that they're struggling to map out correctly, the spatial aspects.
Well, yeah, you know, I think the problem is, you know, computer scientists and engineers, if they're not surgeons, I think they're not exactly understanding how surgery is done, and that's a problem. That's why I always advocate, not always, but I've advocated now for doctors, surgeons to get masters in AI and to get PhDs. And I'm not saying everybody in a surgical team, but I do think every department should have at least one person who's a surgeon and a PhD in artificial intelligence, because people think we're going to go from like, okay, I'm a surgeon doing surgery, and then there's going to be a robot doing the entire surgery. And it's not that simple, right? We're going to have to do it step by step fashion. We have to split up all the different procedures into little pieces, you know. Those are called surgeries, right? Say you have like 10 surgeries or like 10 steps of a surgery will complete, like say a cholecystectomy, a gallbladder removal. To make a surgery, you have specific movements, smaller, called dexemes. So say you have, you know, 5 or 6 dexeme makes up a surgeon. So you have to automate every little step. And so I use this as an example of, you know, there's a stapler. It has 3 rows of titanium staplers on each side and a blade in between. And it creates a gastrointestinal anastomosis. You stick it into 2 pieces of intestine, you fire the button, and it'll create an anastomosis. It'll do part of the operation. It'll do a surgery, essentially. It'll do the gastrointestinal anastomosis. So if the tissue is not thick enough, it won't fire. If it's too thick, it won't fire. And if it's in between, it'll slow down the firing so that it does it at the right speed. So it has a sensor inside of it. This is, you know, I believe it's called Signia from Medtronic. I have no affiliation with them, but this is an example of automation in surgery that exists today. You know, another example is a ligature device. Ligature, you have 3 buttons. It's been around for decades, and it's a vessel sealing device. If you think it's a small vessel, you'll hit this button. If you think it's a really big vessel, you'll hit this button, and if you're in between, you'll hit this button. And it'll look at 434,000 data points per second, and it'll tell you, the surgeon, when you're ready to cut. So that's an example of, for instance, level 3 autonomy. So we need to understand what autonomy means. We need to understand what artificial intelligence means, and we need to understand what robotics means. And unfortunately, you know, we have some very strict computer scientists who are saying like, well, this is artificial intelligence. It must have machine learning. It must have deep learning. Otherwise, it's not artificial intelligence. And then we have people who are like, it's a robot. You know, it doesn't have movements. It doesn't move like a human. Therefore, it's not a robot. But, you know, these are not the definition of either of these terms.
Yeah.
You know, I use artificial intelligence similar to how I use the definition for robots. Is artificial intelligence is, you know, an algorithm that is able to replicate or replace the actions of a human. But, you know, the actions of a human are multitude. Actions of a human aren't just movement. Actions of a human, or the thought process of a human, are, you know, there's so many things that a human does, you know, just perception, speech, all these things, you know. So it's a very complicated thing. We're actually having a consensus conference on it I think we're doing it in April, because people are really struggling with definitions. Do we call this whole field artificial intelligence surgery? Do we call it computer assisted surgery? Do we call it robotic surgery? Do we call it, you know, digital surgery? Do we call it cyber surgery? There's so many, you know, and then what about surgeomics? What is surgeomics? We have genomics, we have radiomics, and now the poor little surgeons, they have their own omics. Omics comes from the Greek suffix omics, which means the whole. Mm-hmm. So, you know, radiomics looks at every aspect of radiology. It looks at the pixels, it looks at the voxels, and it's able to actually diagnose, in a way, biological activity of a lesion. They're able to say, like, this is a cancer, this is a bad cancer, this is not a cancer, this is a good cancer. And we're able to determine not only should I remove a tumor, but, or excuse me, not only like, can I remove a tumor? Is it away from the vessels? Can I safely remove it? But now just looking at images, we're able to say, should I remove the tumor? This is like a game changer. I can't tell you how frustrated I am when I'm sitting in tumor board and we're just discussing, can I remove the tumor or not? I don't care if you can remove it or not technically. That is not enough for me. I want to know if I should remove it. And if I can have a radiomic algorithm using computer vision, analyzing the voxels that can tell me the biology, and that exists, and I don't have access to it, it infuriates me.
Yeah. This is amazing. I like where you're diving into, and I want to know more about these definitions, and I want to know more about where this is at. Like, what would you want people to understand about these things? Because what you're illustrating is, in order to have a good understanding of it, there needs to be a form of, I would say, cross collaboration and cross education.
No, absolutely. We need computer scientists. So we need surgeons with backgrounds in computer science. We need surgeons who have PhDs, in artificial intelligence. We need department heads who support young surgeons getting masters, who discuss with their deans to try to get funding to have a computer scientist. It doesn't have to be a surgeon. You can have a department that just has a computer scientist. In radiation oncology, the treatment of cancers with radiation, there is a physicist on every department. And the physicist is actually the one at the end of the day who calculates the dose. I love this model. And I believe we need this model in other departments, not just surgery, but pediatrics, everything, to analyze the data. We need a computer scientist in each department, ideally. At the very least, if you have one person trying to deal with all the different departments in the world, you're not going to ever get anything done. In an ideal world, this is what we would have. Absolutely.
No, I appreciate that. And furthermore, what are the definitions you'd want people to know about autonomy, about AI, robotics?
So, you have people get confused with artificial intelligence surgery. They're like, oh, we're not there yet. It's crazy. What are you talking? And like, I just gave you some examples of why not only are we there, but we've been there for decades. We've been doing artificial intelligence surgery for decades. So the first thing is, what is surgery? Surgery now is not just, an incision. It's not just laparoscopic surgery. It is also endoscopy. We call it now endoscopic surgery because we can do a lot of things endoscopically that we used to do surgically, through an abdominal incision or through laparoscopy. But now you also have interventional radiologists that are able to do more and more things that we used to do through traditional surgery. They're able to do percutaneously. So we call that percutaneous surgery. So I'm originally from New York, but I moved to Paris over 5 years ago. And there are departments here, hepatic, pancreatic, and biliary surgery departments, where they have people on staff, surgeons, who do endoscopy, interventional radiology, and surgery. So we have to understand that the term surgery now is interventions, anything that involves an intervention. Essentially a knife, an incision, but it can be a very small incision just for a needle. It can be a big incision for a surgery. It can be a 1 centimeter incision for keyhole surgery, otherwise known as minimally invasive surgery. Or it can be through a natural orifice, endoscopic. So that's the first thing. That's why I like to use the example of an AICD as an example of autonomous surgery, because an interventional radiologist puts in an AICD. They make an incision, they put in a device, they use fluoroscopy, they feed the wires down into the heart, and voila, this is an example of an artificially intelligent surgery, in my opinion. Now we know the term surgery. Now, autonomy or automatic, right? So automatic, you hit a button, it has no sensor, it just does something. That is really level 1 or level 2 autonomy. There's 6 levels of surgical autonomy. Okay, there's level 0, no autonomy whatsoever. And these are based on the 6 levels of an autonomously driving car. Level 1 is telemanipulation, like the Da Vinci, just a telemanipulator, very low level autonomy, very uninteresting to me as someone who's an artificially intelligent, who's interested in artificial intelligence. Now, it's a great device. It's a beautiful device. Don't get me wrong, especially in the pelvis. But we have to understand it is not a big difference from traditional minimally invasive surgery. It is minimally invasive surgery, just with a fancier end effector at the end of the day. Level 2, the stapler I told you about. That's an example of level 2 autonomy. that has a sensor in it and then makes determinations on its own on how to fire or if to fire. Level 3, the ligature I told you about. Level 4, and level 3 is because you have multiple options to choose from, and then the machine does it. Level 4, the machine does the majority of the procedure, but you still need a human involved. And an example of that is like interventional cardiology, where interventional cardiologists will get access into a vessel, thread up a catheter up into the heart, and then the device, once it's in the right atrium, will detect zones of abnormal electrical activity because of arrhythmias or what have you, and it'll do the ablation by itself. So that's an example of level 4. And level 5, I told you, is like an AICD or the pacemaker. Pacemaker also that regulates somebody's heart. That's another example of arguably level 5 autonomy. So usually I use the words automatic for level 1 and level 2, and then I use the words autonomous for levels 3, 4, and 5. Okay. So you can also use the term weak AI for levels 1 and 2, or strong AI for levels 3, 4, and 5. So we need to understand that the levels of autonomy. We need to understand what artificial intelligence is. Now we can get to artificial intelligence. Did we talk about robot? We did talk about a robot. A robot is a device that is able to replicate what a human does. Okay, that's the bottom line. So I do believe AICD fits that criteria here for the reasons I told you. So we talked about robot. So the last thing is artificial intelligence. And if you've been paying attention, a lot of these terms, they overlap with each other. Artificial intelligence is when you use algorithms, math equations, essentially, to statistics, really, to determine things, to understand things, to help make decisions. So sometimes you can have unsupervised learning. Sometimes you can have supervised learning, where essentially you kind of tell the algorithm what you want it to tell you. Unsupervised learning, the algorithm is able to come up with answers to questions you didn't necessarily ask. Then you have reinforcement learning, which is basically trial and error. It learns from an error. It learns from making mistakes, much like we do as humans, right? So that's used a lot in robotics. Then you have deep learning, which is an architecture. It is within machine learning. It's a type of machine learning, essentially. It's the way the algorithms are connected, and they're connected based on, loosely based on the human neocortex, on the nervous system. You have essentially layers with nodes, like decision-making nodes that are interconnected, much like neurons and everything. So when you have at least 2 layers, that's known as a deep learning architecture. Some people think you have to have at least 3 layers, but I'm reading a book from MIT, and actually they talk about 2 layers is enough for it to be considered deep learning. So now so again, you have your algorithms, you have the way your algorithms are interconnected, that's your deep learning. Because of deep learning, we're able to create computer vision, essentially for the robot or a computer or a machine to understand visual information. All right, so you need deep learning architecture for that. Then you need deep learning architecture also for natural language processing. Language is very complex. People use irony, sarcasm, and humor, so it's very hard to understand without using deep learning architectures. That is AI. And all of this to say that AI is again, similar to robotics, similar to how we use the term robotics. AI is when you have an algorithm with or without a deep learning architecture that is able to make decisions like a human, to make, that a human can. So a human sometimes makes very complex decisions, but a human sometimes makes very simple decisions. So I'm still surprised how many people tell me, like when I have this conversation with them, they're like, well, that's not AI, or this is AI, or what have you. But it's a big problem I find when I have a computer scientist telling me what artificial intelligence surgery is. And it's a big problem, again, when I have a surgeon who knows nothing about AI telling me what artificial intelligence surgery. And this is why we started the journal. We have a journal, Artificial Intelligence Surgery. I'm the editor-in-chief. I think we're on volume 4, shockingly. Our first official impact factor is coming out in January. We're very excited about that. So I think, yeah, technically it took us 3 years to get our first official impact factor. So that's kind of a big deal. It's hard to do for a new journal in 3 years, but apparently we've been able to do it. So we're very happy about that. But hopefully that kind of makes some sense.
No, absolutely. I actually really appreciate you breaking all of that down. I consider myself someone that have at least some experience with these things, but I will be very humble. This was very educational for me in helping me be able to further discern the differences. We recently had a speaker come, Neil Lawrence from DeepMind over in Europe. He came over and spoke with us, and it helps me understand a lot more of the nuance of what he was talking to in the different systems.
Yeah, and again, I like to use the word artificial intelligence surgery. When we started the journal, I remember calling my friends. I'm like, am I crazy calling a journal artificial intelligence surgery? But this was about 4 years ago. And lo and behold, as you know, the term has kind of exploded even further. So it was great timing. But now, is it the right term going forward? Do we need to talk about computer assisted? For when we do Da Vinci, because there's a computer involved, and with augmented reality and all these other things, or when we look at large data sets and we use machine learning and deep learning to understand certain things from data sets, should that be digital, or we're just doing stuff on computers, like out of the operating room? Maybe artificial intelligence surgery should just be things that happen in the operating room, but we want decision support in the operating room. So we have the concept, maybe it should be called integrated surgeomics, for when we use radiomics and analysis of pathology images, pathomics and analysis of genomics, whole genomic sequencing, to determine what chemotherapy, what immunotherapy to give people pre-op and post-op. And then should we call it video surgeomics, when we have decision support based on the integrated surgeomics in the operating room? When the computer maybe can look using video information from all the other information preoperatively that it analyzed, and it can say, look, this doesn't look good. The patient has 11 liver metastases. But you know what? When we look at the preoperative imaging and looking at the aspect now in the operating room, this patient has good biology. They're going to respond to chemotherapy. You should go ahead with removing 11 metastases. And then by the same token, on the flip side, you have a tumor, it's small, maybe it's a little stuck to the vessel, but can get it out. But then the computer can tell you, you know what? It's not worth it, because this patient's going to have metastases, probably already has metastases. Stop the surgery. I mean, this is the holy grail of what we're trying to do as surgeons. We want support, because we all have patients that we can't explain. Like, I have a patient, I use the example, I took out 11 metastases, young guy. I just kept going. And then at the end of the day, I had moved 11 metastases, and I was doing ablations, and I thought, like, oh my God, am I crazy here? And every year still, I get a message from the oncologist, like, still alive, how you doing? And I would love to know before surgery, because I have the other case where I do the surgery, and then the patient has metastases right away, or they have a very virulent cancer, and I put them through a big surgery for nothing. So this is why we're passionate and interested in artificial intelligence surgery, because we want to help our patients. We want to stop guessing. I don't want to guess what chemotherapy to give you and then wait 3 months on the CT scan and be like, oh, sorry about all those complications you had on chemotherapy, but the chemotherapy was a waste of time. We're going to try another chemotherapy. No, I don't want that anymore. I want to know now. I want to analyze all the data. I want access to the whole genomic sequence of the tumor. I want access to the radiomics, to the radiology image. I want a computer to do pathomics on the pathology slides. I want to look at all the clinical data, and I want to stop guessing, and I want to change. And we want to change surgery from what we were told when we were in medical school. It's the art of surgery. We want to change it finally to the science of surgery. And that is, like, in a nutshell, what we're trying to do.
You can tell that you know how to articulate this very well, and there's a reason you're the chief editor. This is amazingly illustrative and enlightening for me. What I would like to know personally is, what are, like you said, genomic data points. When you're talking about being able to not just look at that, there's obviously countless data points I don't understand in these aspects of oncology. and what you would do as a surgeon in that relationship. Illuminate me. What are the key variables, and what does that require of the AI?
So basically, we have about 20 to 25,000 genes. Okay. Right now, like Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center, they look at 505 genes. They look at, they obviously did a great job. They found the 505 genes most likely to impact cancer. And based on those results, they offer people chemotherapy, drug trials, experimental drugs, immunotherapy, what have you. Whole genomic sequencing, I don't even know if you remember, but when they first did it, the Human Genome Project, it was, incredibly expensive, millions and millions of dollars. Now, to do whole genomic sequencing, it costs about $1,000, which is mind blowing to me. For $1,000, I can look at the tumor and get the entire sequence. Then maybe I can compare it to their regular tissue. So maybe $2,000, I can have this mountain of data. But there is no, and so instead of looking at just 505 genes, I can look at all 20 to 25,000 genes. I can combine that with the preoperative radiology images, right? Now, most people are just looking at one radiology slice, maybe an arterial phase, one slice, and they're able to learn, like, all right, this cancer is going to recur in 2 years, this cancer is not going to recur in 2 years, just based on an image, which is incredible. I want to look at all the images, the 3D reconstruction, the venous phase, the arterial phase. Maybe I want to look at the MRI. Maybe I want to look at the PET CT scan. I want to fuse that with the whole genomic sequence data. Then I want to look at the pathology slides. Do the same thing. Look at all the pathology slides. Look at all the pixels. Feed that in there too. Then I want to look at what chemotherapy did they get? What did they respond to? What surgery did they get? How many lymph nodes were removed? Did they have blood loss during surgery? Are they overweight? Do they smoke? All these things, want to feed this in. And this is what we do basically on Tumor Board. But we do it on a much smaller level. We're like, oh, do they have this mutation or this mutation? How many lymph nodes were removed? Are they healthy? Are they overweight? And then we make a guess. I hate everyone to know, we make a very educated guess. But we're looking at, say, 15 data points. Maybe at most we're looking at 25 data points, really. Or even let's say 100 data points. But with AI, we can look at millions of data points. And we can do it, we can do it quickly. So this is what the hope is. Now, to run all this data, you have to collect it, which is very hard. You have to make sure it's correct, which is very hard. Then you have to run it. You have to create the algorithm that makes sense, very hard. And then you have to run it in a supercomputer. It takes about 6 weeks to spit out at the end of the day. And it's very expensive to run the supercomputer for 6 weeks. And then if your algorithm's wrong, guess what? That 6 weeks of using a supercomputer is just thrown in the trash. So it's a very expensive process, but it's a very noble process. And I wish governments, instead of blowing each other up, would put it into this type of thing. That's why I'm not afraid of artificial intelligence, as long as it's used for, curing people. Because if this works in cancer, we can use the same paradigm in benign problems, inflammatory bowel disease, amyloidosis, lupus. We take tissue, we look at whatever imaging, we do the radiomics, we look at the slides, we look at the pixels, we do the pathomics, we mix it with the clinical data, and now we know what to do, or at least to the best that is ever going to be possible. And we can do that now. That's why it's such an exciting time to be a surgeon. A lot of, I think, medical students are frustrated and depressed, and it's hard and all these things. But actually, I've never been more excited to be a surgeon in my life than right now.
Dr. Gumbs, this is amazing. Thank you so much for honestly enlightening me about this. And I'm excited to share this with people in my family. I have a oncology nurse practitioner, and my uncle is in fact the veterinary pathologist for the state. And
Wow.
he would find a lot of this stuff very fascinating, as you might understand. But for me, it illuminated me to my lack of knowledge, my ignorance. And
Well, hey, remember, this is one man's opinion. That's why we need the consensus conference. We need more meetings. Read the journal if you're interested. But this is remember, my opinion. None of this is written in stone exactly, but I think you get my point of view at least. We'll put it at that.
Absolutely. You're looking for definitions that can be universally utilized and for cross-pollination between different, we could argue, industries or different branches of science as well as applications. And then from there, trying to develop a unified system to help us work together.
One thing I also want to mention is, what some studies have found is when you start to mix omics, when you mix like radiomics and pathomics, sometimes the data is worse. And I don't think it's necessarily a problem of the data. It could be. I think it's a problem of the way, of the architecture, of the decision trees, of the nodes, how they're put together. So it's just to say that it's not like you can just take all the information, put it in a bucket, pour it into a computer, and then the answer will spit out. It's going to be a very difficult and long process. But one of the hopes, we have this project called Artificial Intelligence, Radiomics, Genomics, Oncopathomics, and Surgeomics. We're starting to collect all these data points I was telling you about. We're starting to collect the whole genome from tumor samples, the radiology images, the pathology slides, and the clinical data. And we're starting to do it in, we're doing it right now in Germany, but we're starting to do it in other centers around Europe and also in Asia, to see if we can get this to work better than current methods.
Do you have a theoretical funding requirement to even get this into initial testing and development? Like, I know you're still acquiring the data, and that in and of itself is a huge hurdle.
Yeah, I mean, we just applied to. I work with this company in France, and we just applied for a $60 million grant for. Well, that grant won't cover just what I talked about. Will also cover different types of robots that are in development. But then we applied for another grant just specifically for this software I'm telling you about, Ergos. We applied for about 20 million euros for that, just to give you an idea of what it's going to cost. Kind of for one, that's looking at colorectal cancer.
One single.
One, like, yeah, exactly. And so imagine we'd have to, but once we have the algorithm and the architecture, then it should be easier, at least, to replicate it.
Absolutely. Once you've done it one time, the barrier drops dramatically because you have a reference.
Exactly.
Wow. Is there anything that you'd want to leave the audience with? I will be very blunt. Medicine is not my background. So I've got to educate myself after this. And I'm going to literally go through AI. And I'm like, on this podcast and newsletter I'm doing, expand on each of the concepts he addresses for the general audience for my own welfare.
Well, like I said, I harken back to the journal. We put a lot of effort into it. There's a lot of editorials. It's not just, it is written for professionals, but I think when you read the commentaries or the perspectives or the editorials, a little bit easier for you to digest. So I recommend you go there if if you're interested. We have a podcast also, Artificial Intelligence and Cyber Surgery, where we talk to luminaries around the world. So there's other ways to get involved, but it's an exciting field, and I'm very happy for your interest, and I thank you for reaching out to me.
No, you're welcome. This is awesome because this is how I learn. I believe in the concept called the Medici effect. If you're familiar with the Medici family,
of course,
developed the trade lines. And I believe that the more I can educate myself on disparate things, the more I can train my brain, not just on knowledge, but things that are uncomfortable, like dancing or martial arts. It's going to help me cognate and create more innovative concepts.
Well, the Medici family also massacred a lot of Protestants in France. So, take it with a grain of salt. Watch a movie called Queen Margot.
Queen Margot?
Yeah, La Reine Margot. A great movie with Isabella Adjani. It's a great movie. And you'll learn more about your Medici. But I think the Medici also brought the fork to France. So I think my mom always used to tell me that. Remember to tell the French that if it weren't for them, they'd still be eating with their hands. If it wasn't for the Italians, they'd still be eating with their hands.
I'm sure that goes over well.
Exactly. I don't tell it to too many people.
Well, thank you again, Dr. Gumbs. This has been amazing, and I appreciate it. I will go through your profile you have on LinkedIn just to add additional color and flavor to developing the newsletter. I'll present it to you before approval and before broadcasting it, and we'll go from there.
Great. Have a great day.
You too. Bye.
Bye-bye.